Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for connecting with us here in the International Fortepiano Salon. This is the first salon of our fourth season. in which we engage with other early music lovers and enrich our knowledge about historical pianos and performance practice. We are looking forward to hear your thoughts, comments, and questions. So please do say hello and perhaps mention where you are joining us from. You can do that in the chat box if you're watching us from YouTube, or as a comment if you are joining from Facebook. This season is packed with very exciting topics and wonderful performance and new ideas that I won't reveal just yet, but I will at the end of the program. In fact, we're going to be very busy. We have another salon next Sunday at 2 p.m., same time, East time. And I will let Maria Rose introduce it for you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Maria Rose, and I'm in the Catskill Mountains. And I'm looking forward to this wonderful afternoon, and also looking forward already to next week when we have another salon, which is really going to be special, because many of you who have watched our salons probably know Pierre Gois, the Swiss fortepianist and early keyboard specialist, who has already presented some of his projects with students. Now there is another one coming next week, and this is a project he conducted together with the fortepiano builder Mathieu Villon in France, and and Michael Letcham, a well-known researcher and specialist in Stein fortepianos. Stein was the fortepiano builder who was very good friends with Mozart, who Mozart visited in Augsburg. And he is sort of considered the first of the builders of Viennese fortepianos. They did a lot of research and studied all of Stein's still existing pianos all around the world in different museums. And on the basis of that, they built a replica, Mathieu Villon especially, and he's going to be presenting this instrument, and they're going to be playing on it and show how incredibly innovative Johann Andreas Stein was in his day, and the kind of sounds that he was able to produce with his new style of fortepiano. So please join us next week if you can. It will be a little bit focused on the technical aspects of the piano, but there will also be performances and tryouts of their students who are exploring these wonderful instruments. So hope to see you next week. Now I will introduce Iheng, and she's going to introduce our guests of today.
Hi, thank you so much, Maria and Patricia. For those of you who don't know us, Maria Rose, Patricia Garcia-Gil, and myself, Iheng Yang, are the hosts of the International Fortepiano Salon. Welcome back, and thank you for joining us. We have a wonderful salon today with two of my dear friends who are in Holland, Shunske Sato, a wonderful violinist, and Shuann Chai, a spectacular forte pianist. Shuann Chai is a professor of piano at the Codarts Rotterdam, and also recently released a beautiful album of solo Schubert on the fortepiano. And she is joined today with her partner musically and in life, Shunske Sato, who is a wonderful period violinist who for the past 10 years, I think was the leader of the Amsterdam Bach Society, and now also is flourishing as a conductor and a guest soloist and leader in many wonderful groups around Europe. So it is our great pleasure to welcome Shuann Chai and Shunske. Hello, friends. Great to see you.
Hello.
Hello.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for your invitation.
A big hug over here from Manhattan. I hope you're having a great day.
Likewise back.
So we're so excited over here in America and North America to be hearing about your new album release coming up, the complete piano and violin sonatas of Beethoven. So let me just ask you a question because I'm curious, what inspired this project? It's a huge undertaking, and I can't wait to hear it when it comes out. We'll be hearing a little preview today. When did this idea begin?
Well, I mean, I think for the CD recording itself, just a certain number of external parameters kind of came together. I think we had a chance to play all of them, not in one go, but across 2 concerts, 5 concerts each, 5 sonatas each. And we were honestly kind of worried, not only about ourselves surviving the concerts, but also just audience wise, would it be interesting enough, and I think we'd always felt very strongly about this music. It was something. It was this the storytelling and the narrative and the drama and the everything that you find in Beethoven's music felt really close to us. And then yeah, these 2 concerts happened, and everybody just kind of said, "Wow, we've never heard these pieces like this before." And then that came together also with meeting the person who became a recording engineer, and then the label. And so I think without those external pieces, and then of course the crowdfunding that we did to raise it, and involving people and letting people know about what we're doing. So yeah, it's certainly not would not have been possible without any one of these things coming to complete the puzzle.
Well, it's wonderful that you saw it through, and you're giving a world a wonderful, refreshing gift. Shuann, I have a question for you, since we're in a fortepiano salon today. Talk about the instruments that you used for the recording, how you selected them, why, and what did that bring to your performances?
Well, I think first of all, the sonatas themselves, there are 10, and 9 of them are written in Beethoven's 5 to 5.5 octave period. And after a break of several years, and he wrote number 10, the final sonata. And by that time, he was working with a 6-octave instrument. And so I thought from the outset that it would be nice to record the first 9 on one instrument, and then the 10th one alone on a larger piano. And I have to say that this also stuck in my mind because Sylvia Berry, our friend and colleague, I don't know if I've even told you this yet, but when she heard that that Shunske and I were together, and it's just a very weird thing that I suddenly remember her saying. She said, "Just promise me when you record the Beethoven sonatas together, please don't use a 6-octave for the whole thing. Please do the right thing. Please record the Kreutzer on the little piano, and please don't be tempted to." And I just thought it was such a weird thing to say, and I was just like, "Oh, Sylvia, come on, whatever." So I kept meaning to tell you that, and I kept forgetting. So thank you, Yiheng, for
You're welcome.
but and I don't think Sylvia's on today, but I'll talk to her soon. And but yeah, indeed, we wanted to have this distance, to be able to hear the distance between the 10th sonata and the 9 sonatas that came previously to that, and also the excitement of playing the Kreutzer on a quote unquote little piano. It's a piece that's larger than life, and in some ways you can't find a piano that's big enough for it. But on the other hand, playing it on a 5.5 octave instrument, it's incredibly exciting because you really hear Beethoven pushing all the boundaries. You really hear the upper bound, just in terms of pitch, but also in terms of what he asks of the instrument itself. It's incredibly exciting, and I was really lucky to have a 6-octave Rosenberger piano from the NMF, the National Music Instruments Foundation, here in the Netherlands, and then I remembered that Edwin Bunk has a smaller Rosenberger, so same maker. And 2 pianos that were about roughly 20 years apart. in the production line, or 20 years or less, let's say. And so I thought it would be a really good idea to stay with this kind of color, this same kind of aesthetic from one maker, and really, find a continuity that way, but just have enough difference in timbre, in range. I thought that was also reflective of the sonatas themselves, and it turned out to be really fun for me to do, and to get to know these pianos in this way. It's really, really nice opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. I was speaking of pushing boundaries. I from the little that I got to hear in advance of today, I love your approach, and pushing boundaries would be an apt theme, I may guess, in your whole endeavor in this project. But talk about briefly, and I'm sure now we can't wait to hear some of this Kreutzer, which we will in a minute or two. Talk about the kinds of sources that inspired you, historical sources. I know that you're both really passionate about 19th century performance practice, 18th century talk about the things that gave you inspiration as you were recording and playing together, whether it's things you read or listened to or thought about.
I think for me personally, actually, it started with what's that harpsichordist name? Robert. He has a brother who's a fortepiano maker. Hill. Yes, there we go. And it was a funny encounter because it was in the context of a Bach context. So I was in Leipzig, and I had the opportunity of just kind of sitting down and chatting with him about stuff, and we got onto 19th century performance practice, and he said, I don't remember the question or the context, but he said, if you're really serious about that, go and listen to only historical recordings for like a year, and see what happens to yourself. And as I was already, I loved listening to old recordings because they were freer, they were much more personal. Told me a lot about not only the piece but also the person playing it. And I did that actually very, and that was not at all a far stretch for me. And so really absorbing this idiom, which you can kind of categorize, of course, and say this is different, that is different, but just getting the gist, like listening to a new language. You go and learn Spanish, you go live in Spain, and you hear it day in, day out, like this. And I think the real fortunate thing about this particular period of music is that indeed you start to have an abundance, a real abundance of aesthetic, technical. You even have photographs of people playing, and so you get an idea about their posture or their fingerings, or in Beethoven's case, we have Czerny, of course, and many others many others who wrote about Beethoven, who heard Beethoven. There's simply ample evidence, and everything points towards a very volatile, very spontaneous, very different approach, and in very specific ways to, for example, as a string player, you have old editions from the earlier part of the 19th century with fingerings, and then that tells you, oh, there's definitely going to be a portamento here, etc. So you can find out quite a lot. And I think the challenge is more about kind of really making it your own, and not just kind of a facade that you put on, but really
Well, there's a lot. I mean, not besides all of that, there's the studied with Beethoven. There's a lot of writing from Czerny about supposedly he heard Beethoven play all the piano sonatas, all the trios, all of the violin and cello sonatas, and so he wrote down a descriptive paragraph or two about each movement. And that's a great place to start, along with tempo markings, some notes about articulation and so forth, pedaling. But also for me, I really enjoyed reading Beethoven's letters. In almost every other letter, he complains about how much he hates writing letters, but then he wrote so many and so often, because the post used to come five times a day in Vienna during Beethoven's lifetime. And this was, the texting, the way of constant communication. So Yeah, and the number of letters that he would write in one day, and his mood and his health, that he was almost always physically uncomfortable. He was in very poor health all his life. And yeah, I think he saw himself in an uphill battle for everything, for respect, for inspiration, for yeah, all sorts of things. And reading him in such an unfiltered way, and then looking at the music, which seems, it is so curated and so crafted. I thought that was a really great way to imagine getting to know someone.
Or even like descriptions of like how he rehearsed. Like he was, he was apparently bringing aspects of rubato that were completely or let's say the degrees of rubato within orchestral playing, for example, that the musicians were unfamiliar with, and he would, quite contrary to his kind of reputation of being hot-headed, he was apparently very, very patient with musicians, and would just be completely delighted when his musicians got it. Or there's even a little drawing painting of him conducting a chamber music ensemble, which is completely nonsensical unless you consider the fact that he was requesting something very, very different from what was common practice at that time. So things like this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for all these insights. And we'll keep talking further about them. But first, let's hear some music. Tell us quickly what we'll hear first, the first movement of the Kreutzer, and what we will be seeing. Well, what is this video you're going to share with us now?
This is taken during. Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
This is the first movement of the Kreutzer violin sonata. So you can tell us where it was filmed and.
Sure. It was filmed during the CD recording session, actually, in the West 90 Church in Schiedam, Schiedam, Schiedam. That's between The Hague and Rotterdam. Beautiful town full of windmills and so forth. And
still operational.
Yeah, still operational windmills. That's right.
Yeah, making flour.
And yeah, so we had 3 sessions, 3 separate sessions for the 10 sonatas. This comes from the final session in February, early February. And I believe what we have is we have the first movement video, and then the second movement we have just the audio. If there's time for both movements, we can see.
Yes, yeah. After the first movement, we can talk a little bit about the ornamentation and variations
okay, sure.
that you worked on for the second movement. So we certainly want to hear that as well.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Shuann and Shunske. So here's the first movement of the Kreutzer Sonata. That was the electrifying performance of the first movement of the Kreutzer Sonata by Beethoven with our guests today, Sato, Chai, and Shunske Sato. Thank you, guys. I'm actually like, I have goosebumps. I feel like I was at the premiere when George Power and Beethoven read in front of an audience of elite people in the music world then for the first time, but the sense of creating and willing this piece into the room, you captured that, and on top of it being just incredibly performed on both of your instruments. There's so much to this, what you brought to this piece already. But in the interest of time, I won't keep talking further, but I want you to talk about now the second movement, because this brings us into other parts of performance practice that many of us are studying these days and working on: improvisation and ornamentation, on top of the freedom of tempo and arpeggiation and that we already hear in the first movement. We're going to hear the second movement, but talk about this second movement and your process in going beyond the score with it.
Well, I think you could hear a little bit in the first movement already that we viewed the cadenzas as kind of an open invitation to fill in the blank. Of course, there are some cadenzas that we felt were really best, left kind of, in suspense, let's say, and just to hold the moment. And then there were others where we added fillers, sometimes to let the tension dissipate, and sometimes in the C major cadenzas in the beginning of the exposition, as kind of an opportunity to just go a little bit hog wild. And
in fact, about that C major cadenza, there is actually documented evidence that points to two things. So one is that actually in the first draft that Beethoven wrote down, the big famous piano cadenza, there's nothing there. It just has a fermata.
Yeah.
So that's kind of information number one. And information number two is actually and instead of mentioning Beethoven, it mentions Bridgetower, who made the C major kind of he goes down and up as the piano the printed piano cadenza does. So one then actually wonders, maybe Bridgetower kind of maybe came up with that particular sequence of notes, and then it got embedded into the piano part,
which was published later.
Which was published then later. So for that particular one, we even have that extra little bonus information that we then took, and of course we played around with it ourselves.
So then for the second movement, we extrapolated a little bit from that, and because they're variations anyway, we were pretty free.
Yeah, and also
with the repeats, especially. Yeah,
I guess also the idea is like Bridgetower was reading off of like complete chicken scratch over Beethoven's shoulder. I mean, he probably got the harmonic sequence, and right away, and probably not being able to read Beethoven's handwriting anyway. So he must have
just done something.
So
we tried to do kind of the same anyway.
Great. So a reenacted jam session,
something like that.
Way. How do you prepare yourselves to improvise in this way? Are you doing it all the time? Do you do it outside of rehearsing the piece?
Actually, since this was a recording, we were really strict with ourselves, and we wrote everything down. Because I think otherwise our recording engineer and camera person would never speak to us ever again. So yeah, just to be consistent, and also to just give ourselves more of a chance. If we had a great idea, I mean, so we did constantly change little things as we recorded, because we realized some things worked better, some things didn't. But Yeah, I think on stage we feel more free to just kind of see what happens. And if you crash and burn sometimes, then so be it. But you don't want to do that on a CD recording.
Mm.
So we tried to be strict with ourselves and figured out most of the second movement ornaments beforehand. Yeah.
Mm. And so it sounds like you are improvising now when you're recitaling in public.
Mhm.
What
Often,
is
yeah.
what is that like for you and for the audience? What are the responses you get?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it depends on for where the audience is concerned. That's individually
Mm,
everybody's going to react differently. But I think for us, in any case, I think we basically what we agree on is not really like how can I put it? We agree on the plot.
mhm,
It's a little bit like an improv in the sense that we establish that we'll be going from point A to B to C to D, but how
mhm.
we get from each point to the next, that is just listening and
Mhm.
reacting,
Yeah.
both to the audience and also to ourselves. And so I think so long as we're in agreement with certain key points of the music, and we do decide which bits are those key points, then it's basically yeah, just kind of literally playing around
Mm.
on the spot. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, let's listen to your recorded performance of the second movement of the Kreutzer Sonata, and to our audience, there will be a brief Q&A after we hear the second movement. So feel free to continue typing in your questions in the comments section of your YouTube and Facebook if you have any questions for our guest today. So this is Shuann Chai and Shunske Sato in a preview of their upcoming Complete Beethoven Sonatas album, second movement of the Kreutzer Sonata. Thank you. We hate to put an end to this really refreshing performance of the second movement of the Kreutzer, but we are running out of time, having too good of a time looking into the world of Beethoven with our wonderful guests, Shuann and Shunske. But we wanted to save some time to give some upcoming announcements. I'll let Patricia and Maria tell us what's coming up for the Salon, and then we'll have a quick Q&A with our guests. I think we have a couple questions from our audience. Thank you so much.
Is it
Patricia,
okay?
Yeah, yes.
Why don't you do the announcement now? Because I have some questions about the Kreutzer, but
of course.
After.
Of course. So before I forget, and as I promised, and before we leave this salon being so inspired by these amazing performances and artists and this recording that really pushes boundaries, I'm very excited to announce this new special group of salons, which aims for embracing a wider audience and conversations between the world of culture, music, and ideas, and that will happen in spring of 2025. And we will be telling you much more about this soon, maybe in the next program. But for now, I just wanted to share the title we have come up with, which is Music and Ideas Series Coming to the Table. And with this, thank you so much for such a wonderful performance and inspired recording. I think we have some questions for you.
Maria, I'm sure you have a wonderful question, but let's take one from our audience first, and then we'll get to yours. So this is a question for Shuann and Shunske from Alyssa Campbell. Hi, Alyssa. I know you. She's a wonderful violinist who just completed her studies in The Hague, I believe, and it's back in New York City. Alyssa asks, I'd love to know how you balance the classical and romantic performance practice ideas with Beethoven in particular, and how much this changes between the early to late sonatas. Thank you for that.
Well, maybe the first thing that springs to my mind is, the terms classical or romantic. And, these are always terms that, we have, for our convenience, that we assign to certain periods of time. in retrospect. But I think, people, you kind of wonder how people are going to call our age. What do we call it now? And we don't really have a name. So I think, it's good always to keep in mind that times and places and things that for us are in neat categories and boxes, they're just kind of going about their daily lives and writing music that's demanded of them, and instruments that are around them and being made for them. And if anything, I think maybe the so-called classical period, if I think about Carl Philipp, and those who were, he was of course incredibly influential in terms of all the aesthetical parameters, and his, of course, book that he wrote that Beethoven apparently always had with him, and of course, and if you think about how extreme and volatile that music was, I think maybe the difference between the earlier music, and you see this a little bit in Beethoven too, is that they're a little bit more maybe fragmented. Is that maybe a good word? They really leap from one idea to the next very, very quickly. And again, like in Beethoven, you see this too, that it's a little bit more. It works a little bit like modules, kind of aligned, and they of course have connections to each other, but they're quite also very distinct. Whereas the later you go, these modules start to maybe expand, and you have, you stay, let's say, in one mode or module for a longer time. But I mean, me personally, I don't really make that distinction per uh,
Time
epoch, in that, yeah,
period
time period,
or
and you need to really
aesthetic.
just consider each
Yeah.
piece by its own.
Yeah.
Just because it's from a later period doesn't mean it won't be referring back to some earlier traditions, and vice versa.
Now, it's true with the series of 10 sonatas that we, I would say indeed that, for example, in the very first sonata, Opus 12, number 1, that most of our ornamentation is done more locally. But I think that's also the nature of the piece. It's D major, it's bright, it's happy, it goes at a really kind of snappy clip, and I think that's all it needs is a little mm, yeah, light here, a little spice here, a little dash here, and it doesn't really leave you room to do kind of a big like cadenza like thing. And Yeah, so it is different, but I think that would be more. Yeah, I think that's more of a piece by piece kind of consideration. What fits in the aesthetic of what you're trying to say, what this piece is trying to say. Indeed.
Thank you. Maria, you have a question.
Yeah, it
Fun.
actually ties a little bit into what you were just talking about, because I always feel that the French Revolution and what was coming out of, also musically out of France, had quite an impact on Beethoven. And I'm curious because the Kreutzer Sonata is almost contemporary with the Waldstein Sonata, which we know he was influenced by what was going on in France and in Paris, and possibly planning to visit and adapting to French styles. And now we know that Kreutzer Sonata was dedicated to Rudolf Kreutzer, who was, in spite of his German-sounding name, he was a French violinist who taught at the Conservatoire and who was visiting Vienna and met with Beethoven, and they did have interactions. So we don't think he played it, but I was wondering, first of all, whether you had come across any kind of feeling of French influences in the Kreutzer Sonata, and secondly, if you've ever tried to play it on a French piano, which Beethoven had at the time he was composing the
Indeed.
Kreutzer Sonata.
No. Right. He had the 1803 Erard at his disposal. Yeah.
Right, and he was not particularly happy
Indeed.
with it, but he was definitely trying all kinds of things that he wanted to make work
Yes.
on the instrument.
We've never played this on a French instrument. No. and of course that would be really interesting. I played the Appassionata on a Broadwood of 1808 once, and that was really illuminating, I think. So I
Yes.
think trying to bring the Kreutzer over to such an instrument would also be really rewarding for us. Very interesting. Um, French influences. I think that, well, the backstory of this particular sonata is so specific to Bridgetower and the circumstances of their intense and fast friendship, which also died as just as quickly as it began. That I think I've always thought of this as more tied to the volatility of their friendship and also their showmanship, and kind of that in no other sonata does the violin and piano work so hard to almost against each other, that they really try to best each other, in a very show-like way, so that first the violin goes nuts and then the piano goes nuts, but they're rarely going nuts at exactly the same time, which is kind of telling for us. But no, indeed, I hadn't thought about it being particularly French, but it's a wonderful angle, and maybe with the French piano, we'd feel free to explore
Yes,
that.
in the particular techniques that are, to me, to us, they sound, suddenly so much more romantic. But
Mhm.
I also think they are influenced by the different sounds that the piano brought to his ears.
Let's have one more question, and then we can bid farewell to our wonderful guests and to our audience tonight. It's kind of related from Aruth Mazrangan-san. He asks, I would like to ask, how do you draw the line between what's authentic and what's free, personal, and late romantic style when you listen to historical recordings?
That's hard.
So is there even I'm not going to reinterpret this question for you.
But I think that's exactly what we were going to say. Is there a difference between those two things? I mean, of course, we can't get away from the fact, and we don't want to get away from the fact that we're 21st century people. But I think, I don't know. It's perhaps more interesting sometimes to think of what we all have in common with the musicians and the people then, rather to think of them as indeed people who lived 200 years ago and played music by a different set of rules than what we have right now. So I don't know. That's maybe a very vague way to answer this question, but I don't have any.
Well, I mean, I
any
think it's
better
really, there is a lot of information that you can absorb. Let's put it this way.
Yes.
There's a lot of information that direct information, kind of also oblique pieces of information that you can absorb. And if you decide to take that seriously and really experiment with it, and also this is the thing about HIP, it's almost a bit of a contradiction in itself, because, back then they were just doing what they were doing. And now we're we're not doing the same thing, actually. It's kind of a period of music which kind of, what's a good way of putting it, sort of soul searching. Where are we? How does this stand? And maybe one way of satisfying this question is indeed to look into the past and trying to extract information from it. And that is our current state of affairs in the 21st century. And I think authentic, according to whom,
I love how when Aruth wrote his question, he wrote it with authentic, with quotation marks around it. And I think, when we use that word, we almost feel like we have to use quotation marks around it. And I invite everyone to ask themselves why it is that we feel that we have to do that. Because, oftentimes in my teaching, when I encourage someone to take time, or encourage someone to pedal, or encourage someone to do something that's not explicitly on the page, I always get the question back, but is it allowed? And I always say, allowed by whom? And and because that's it's really a question, and I'm not being facetious by asking. I actually really want to know, who is your ultimate authority? Because if you say, okay, then would this be allowed by Czerny, for example? He wrote so much about what he would have allowed, what he would have encouraged, what he would have done. And from my impression is actually that nothing that we have done on the recording comes close to his like end spectrum, and what he writes about timing, what he writes about rubato and how often you should use it, for example. I don't think we're even close. So, this, for me, this is we're recording this, of course, now, and we're working on this now. And I wonder, 5 years from now, am I going to listen to this recording and say, well, this is so boring. This is just, so conservative. And so, I can't believe I thought that this was a maybe, or maybe I will have gone the other way and say, oh, this is absolutely outrageous. This is, whatever. But it has to do with, I think, your personal journey. We can't escape the fact that we're interpreters and we have to take responsibility for that. I've read this much Czerny. I have read this many of Beethoven's letters. And at this moment, this is my best guess. And if you have a better guess, then I want to hear your guess. And that's what we're doing. We're listening to each other's guesses, and I think that's awesome. And I think we should all sit up and own that, and listen to each other. And yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been a wonderful chat, and we wish we could go on, but thank you so much, Shuann and Shunske. Again, I urge everyone, if you're not already excited about their album release, to check out the complete Beethoven sonatas for piano and violin, coming out on Cobra Records in mid-October. Is it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mid-October, and there will be additional accompanying videos of their performances as well. And I think this album is going to be helping all of us to ask the right questions about Beethoven in our time, and inspire us, as you have today with our chat and hearing you play so fantastically. So thank you for being with us. And to our audience, come back next Sunday, and we'll have Pierre Gua and Mathieu Villon in a wonderful salon on Stein pianos. Thank you to my co-hosts, Maria and Patricia. Thank you, Shuann and Shunske, and our wonderful audience. Till next time, goodbye.